Today is October 13th. This is the second Friday meeting of the Phenotype Development Evaluation Workgroup. Very quickly, this is our OKR that we started out with. We had three main objectives: to harden the Phenotype Development Evaluation framework, improve the collaboration amongst our community, and then to promote the usage of the OHDSI Phenotype Library. You probably heard I gave our workgroup's perspective on where we are during the OHDSI call this week. Now for today, I propose the following agenda. This is a running list of ideas that we have worked on or working on, but the main topics that we think we want to focus for today are these, which is let's talk about the OHDSI Phenotype Library, about where it is right now, especially after the recent push of core definitions through the HowOften initiative. And also, let's talk a little bit about the idea that Ben Hamlin and a few others sponsored in our last conversation. And then the other topic that I want to spend the most amount of time today is to just talk about how often and our upcoming face-to-face meeting. And those are the two topics that I would like to cover today. Anything else that you guys want to bring up or is important before we dive into it? Okay, all right. So the OHDSI Phenotype Library, we used the submission process. That's something that we had discussed many months ago. And we use the submission process to get contributions from the community. The submission process is if you want to contribute one or more core definitions for a clinical idea, you start a forum thread, and that forum thread should have a prefix of phenotype submission followed by a hyphen and the clinical idea that you're contributing. We recommend a certain template that you follow that includes information about who the person that is contributing this definition, what is the clinical idea that they're working on, what are the core definitions, what's the logic description that they try to model the target with, and what are the core definitions that they want to contribute to the library. Those are the minimum requirement. We also have some recommended topics such as what is your opinion, or what is your experience, or what is your evaluation summary. We also required an attestation that basically said that if you have built this core definition, please attest that you have actually run it on your person level real data set and have at least one person return in the cohort. So we followed that framework and we got significant contributions. There were a few contributors that made the majority of the contributions, but we did get a big participation. As part of the push, we worked with several groups, including the various clinical work groups that are part of OHDSI. That included the oncology work group, the ophthalmology work group, the perioperative work group that Evan leads, which is not listed here, and I think one more work group. We also had other OHDSI collaborators such as Darwin and the VA Cipher N3C engage in the conversation as part of the contributions. Darwin is interested in contributing at one point in time. They're still trying to figure out how to do it. VA Cipher, for them, it was VA Cipher is a program in the VA that enables VA researchers that are using definitions for phenotype algorithms for any VA research work, and that includes non-OMOP OHDSI based work. What was unique about the conversation with VA Cipher is they said their mission of enabling their community was in line with the OHDSI mission, and when it comes to VA work that centers around OMOP and OHDSI, they may just redirect that conversation to OHDSI itself and use the OHDSI Phenotype Library as the infrastructure for all VA work, which is fantastic. N3C, we created a framework for their contribution where we defined I think an 8 or 9 step process, with the first 6 steps being on N3C side. Once they reach that 6th step, we would take from there and go to the 7th and 8th step to complete the process. I've not got any subsequent update from the N3C group. Overall, in the past 1 month, we went from maybe about 400 definitions, maybe about 300 definitions to more than 500 definitions in the OHDSI Phenotype Library. The OHDSI Phenotype Library is now the input specifications for HowOften. And I think Chris Knoll, one of our OHDSI collaborators, is in the late stages of defining the technical specs of the HowOften study. That's my understanding so far, and the impact that OHDSI Phenotype Development Evaluation Workgroup has done for the HowOften study. Any questions on that topic? Any discussions? I want to quickly go through Ben Hamlin's idea. So we've the OHDSI Phenotype Library. One of the basic tenets that we have discussed is the unit of representation is a cohort definition or a phenotype algorithm that, when instantiated, leads to a cohort. We catalog definitions that are compatible with the OMOP common data model. And they are execution ready in the sense that it is the unit of representation is machine understandable, computer executable code that, when executed, yields a cohort as defined as subject ID, cohort start date, and cohort end date. Now, there has been interest in the community, though, that concept sets or codeless are something that the libraries should handle. I've been on the fence on that topic, but recently a passionate argument from Ben and Joel made me think about it a little bit more. At least at the minimum, could we expose the codeless concept sets that are in the various cohort definitions in the library and make it accessible to individual users? At least let's start that way. So there are 500 cohort definitions in the OHDSI Phenotype Library, and why not expose them out and make them available? And so I've enhanced the code of the OHDSI Phenotype Library, and it is now available. I'll quickly show you where it is. Today's discussion is not about codeless, but
yeah, and Gowtham, I wanted to just add one more thing to this conversation. Yeah. I think that I've managed to, again, this whole idea of understanding the static code set that you would want to attach to a specific phenotype for a specific use case. I think it is one of the things that's going to be added to the OMOP on Fire workgroup OKRs for next year, because again, they're heavy on terminology, and they may be able to provide some contributions about the structure of how that might function through their own discussion. So I'm hopeful that this, I'm going to hopefully be the bridge between the phenotype evaluation group and the OMOP on Fire group in terms of pushing this idea of sort of these concept set availability in these phenotypes, or at least the metadata around them that explains their use or appropriate use or whatever that ends up being. So more to come.
Perfect, Ben. So what I'm showing you here is it's a table that was retrieved from the OHDSI Phenotype Library using an R code. This is exposed in many different ways. This is just one way of retrieving it, but it basically is Phenotype Library get Phenotype Library concept set definition set. And that I asked it to retrieve everything without any constraints, and it gave me all the concept set expressions in the OHDSI Phenotype Library. It's about 1,800 entries, along with all its metadata, names, its expression, its SQL, and also like things like what domain it tackles, how many codes it has, so on and so forth. We can go through it in detail at a later meeting. I just don't want to spend too much time today. Just the purpose of sharing this is just to demonstrate that there has been progress on that idea of making concept sets in the library available. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, hey, I'm curious about this because one of the challenges I run into when we're building quality measures is we need to use code sets that come from VSAC, the LLM Value Set Authority Center, and it's a bit of a challenge. I mean, to bring those in, it'd be lovely if they were curated in a way that there was an easy way to bring it into OHDSI. But I think above and beyond that, to know when there are code sets that are used in these phenotypes, whether they're actually using one of those curated value sets, or whether they have, they've created their own variant of it, because that becomes an important question of, okay, for diabetes, what did they use a standard one, or is it their own? And some sort of metadata to help one, to be able to pull it down similar to what you have, but maybe some other metadata so you've got a sense of whether this is an endorsed code set or one that's more localized. Is that part of what you're thinking about with what you're talking about here?
Yep. So every entry, including a concept set entry, could have a owner or an authoritative person associated with it that has verified that this matches with the source that it is trying to represent. And so then now we have a digital signature of that expression, and then which we can compare with any other implementation to see how that implementation deviates from that digital signature. And if it deviates, then we know it's not the same.
And we can also, thank you.
We can also look at how the expression resolves, and if the resolved expression is different from the one that is expected, then the study or whoever external implemented something has deviated from the source of truth.
Nice.
So we have that framework. It will need some more finessing, but I think the conceptual framework for it has been put into the library right now. Okay, so I want to go into the main topic now. Anything else before I go to the main topic? Awesome. Okay, so I will go to the HowOften repository right now. This is just my Git that's I've pulled together. What is it? Studies HowOften? Yeah, there you go. So the location of the artists. Just so that all of you are aware, there is a GitHub repository, which is under the GitHub OHDSI Studies organization, and it is called HowOften. This is the HowOften GitHub repository. I have cloned it locally, and this is my local clone. I'm just going to go there, and inside that local clone are these files. There was a forum thread in OHDSI that allowed the community to ask questions on incidence rate analysis. Several investigators asked questions. These are the different investigators as named by Joel. And there's questions from Andreas, Aza, Evan, George Ripchak, me, Joel, and then there is an idea of overall. This is the specification that uses as the OHDSI software called Strategist. Now, inside this, over here are the analysis specifications that it is using as inputs. And if I click this, so there is grouped as analysis 1, analysis 2, and analysis 3. The reason why they are grouped in that way is because as the investigators deemed that grouping would be meaningful. The analysis 1 is like a global analysis. This basically answers the questions like, in the general population, what is the incidence of a certain outcome? This is a study that Patrick and George wrote in their protocol. This compares the incidence of certain outcomes among persons who received a drug, and that divides it into persons who received the drug with a certain indication and persons who received the drug irrespective of the indication. They're asking a certain question that's stated in their protocol. These are the set of questions from the community about the question that the community was interested in to learn from the background rate. So if I click on this analysis 1 document, this analysis 1 document has 2 tabs here. One is targets and other is outcome. So basically the way you think about it is among this target, what is the incidence of any of these outcomes? And as part of incidence rate analysis, there is a clean window and a time at rest specifications that's part of the protocol. Now, the responsibility of this, not responsibility, the scope of our work group is to look at all these core definitions and think in terms of its operating characteristics. These core definitions has been submitted to the OHDSI Phenotype Library by a submitter. Some of them have gone through our phenotype development evaluation best practices. Some of them may not have gone through the phenotype development evaluation best practices. So some have gone through and have made their insights explicit, and others have not. And almost, I think none of them have actually, or maybe very few of them have actually gone through a peer review process, wherein a person independently reviews it and gives their input on those definitions. So there is a gap in understanding the performance characteristics of these core definitions. We do not know the sensitivity errors of these definitions. We do not know the specificity errors of this definition. We do not know the index state or rate misclassification errors. So there is an opportunity for us to know about this. There's also there a lot of characterization and incidence rate results would be available for all of these cohorts. So across multiple data sources, we can answer the questions like, what is the incidence of sarcoidosis stratified by age, calendar years, and demographics? That information is available for potentially writing a peer-reviewed scientific publication. So a person who leads a full phenotype development evaluation may have would have the opportunity to lead the characterization paper work. So there's an opportunity there to move our science forward from that perspective. These questions are questions raised by the community. Here, Andreas posed a question, which is, among persons with primary adenocarcinoma of the colon or rectum with MSI-L, MSI intermediate, MSS, or PMMR, which I have to look up what that means. Among that cohort, what is the incidence of anti-neoplastic drugs against colorectal cancer? So this basically would say, what is the incidence of treatment with this type of drugs among persons with this target who match this target profile? But we do not know the performance characteristics of those cohort definitions, and so on. So that's the insight on the how often. Do you have any comments, questions, discussions, thoughts? Anna, you have your hand raised. Welcome.
Yeah, two questions. First, I just wanted to make sure that you're still getting the people for this work, because I wasn't sure, like you set the deadline and I was terribly past the deadline, and I was just making sure that I still can jump into this work.
That was the next discussion topic I wanted to bring up.
Oh, okay. So the question, then the second question that is more relevant to this. So you said writing a paper, and I think that's a really great idea to sort of promote what we are doing here, because there is a lack of papers of the sort, and we've seen these papers are cited for some of the topics. So as we are sort of spreading this idea, do you have any tips on what would be a good paper? Like, how do you know that it's going to be published, that people are going to use it? Like, do you think about clinical problems when you think about this paper, or like, how do you go about it?
Beautiful. Two topics that are the next and the next on the agenda. Perfect. We'll go there. We'll tackle that. So before we tackle Anna's questions or comments, anybody in the work group? I see Evan, you're on the call. Do you want to give an overview of the questions you've asked? And Joel, do you want to?
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, thank you guys so much for for all your work and laying all this out. This was I know it was a tremendous amount of effort, and it really enabled some studies that I think wouldn't have gotten off the ground without you guys supporting it. So again, a big thanks to everybody who was working so hard on it. The main questions that we put together from a perioperative and surgery work group perspective. Number one, there's a cohort we've long wanted to further characterize with respect to major non-cardiac surgery. This was one that had its origins. I mean, Anna will remember it well as well in the Proteus study-a-thon when we were looking at recalibrating the revised cardiac risk index, which is a predictive model that's used before major surgeries to predict cardiac risk and potentially stratify people to more testing or testing after their surgery. So this provides an opportunity to give a incidence rate characterization of a set of perioperative outcomes of interest against that cohort. There is a forthcoming randomized clinical trial looking at postoperative atrial fibrillation, and it's a situation that's commonly encountered where people go into a rhythm that puts you at a higher risk of stroke in the wake of surgery. And what to do about that rhythm is something we've drawn typically from cardiac surgery studies, but we don't know if the risk is higher or lower for stroke in such patients. And so we're looking at postoperative atrial fibrillation, both in that major non-cardiac surgery cohort and then across another set of surgeries to see if there's any kind of individual risk changes across different surgery beds. And then finally, there's also an opportunity here to look at a few different surgeries and do an incidence rate characterization of those. So esophagectomy, pancreatectomy. Typically, these are ones that are done for oncology purposes. And one of our work group members, Brett Butcher, had developed some concept sets that had been at least validated in the sense that they'd had a few physicians kind of go through them and validate the fact that these were these all represented the surgeries they were interested in, and so those were another set of phenotypes that we put out there as targets, and that required a bit more refinement. So thank you guys again for your work, especially while I was on service there and had trouble contributing more than a few phone calls.
Perfect. Thank you, Evan, for the update. And any questions to Evan's questions? Joel, you have 5 specifications here. Do you want to give a high-level overview of the question that motivates it?
Yeah, well, I have a bunch of questions that were particular to some of the groups that I work with at Janssen. One of them was to look at patients with inflammatory bowel disease and to see the incidence of people who get 2 or more concomitant biological drugs at the same concomitant at 2 at the same time. And we're looking at a bunch of different categories: TNF alphas, IL-23/24s, and IL-23s. So we want to see who gets them at the same time. That's one thing. Second one, we want to look at patients with pulmonary hypertension group 2. I'm sorry, pulmonary hypertension group 1, but have prior left heart disease, and to see whether what proportion of those patients are getting actual PAH indicated drugs, because there's some contraindication to having some of those drugs in there. The third one was to look at patients with pulmonary hypertension group 4, called CTEPH, chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, and to see the incidence rates of pulmonary endarterectomy and pulmonary balloon angioplasty in those patients. Those are the definitive treatments for that condition. And the fourth one, we wanted to see the for people with any of group of pulmonary hypertension, WHO groups 1, 2, or 3, how many also have concomitant groups 1, 2, and 3. So do people with group 1 also what proportion of people have concomitant group 2 or concomitant group 3, and so on, all the different iterations from that. And this one was, so this was the targets. Let me just see the outcomes because I don't have this on there. This is looking for background incidence rates of so common. If you go back to the targets, so common outcomes from biologics that are used in these autoimmune conditions like psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis are serious infections and MACE. And we want to see the incidence of those in the overall population to see what's the outcome of MACE or serious infections in that group.
Thank you, Joel. Anybody, any questions or want to collaborate with Joel? Great.
Joel, I have a question.
Joel, I'll reach out to you.
Wait, who said that?
This is Aaron Abend. I run the autoimmune registry, so I definitely am interested in that.
Okay. And you're going to be at the symposium? Are you going to be at the face-to-face?
And I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll chat at some point then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
I actually have a question, not for specific for you, but since you have multiple questions. Now, I'm not yet sure how many data partners are joining HowOften, but potentially there will be at least 2 that I think I know of that will be part of HowOften, that when you created your phenotypes, particularly the outcomes, didn't look at how those phenotypes look at these data sources, but you're still gonna include the results in the incidence rate results. So I keep thinking like there need to be a plan for us to do something about maybe reviewing some of selected maybe cohorts for those 4 questions that we can do in our face-to-face. Because like you came up with this phenotypes, looking at the data and probably all the US data sources that you have access to in J&J.
Okay.
But how would you make sure that those phenotypes are fine in the extra, like say if you have registry from Europe, you're probably going to be missing codes, missing things like you need to make sure that all the data sources in HowOften are fit for use for these phenotypes or vice versa.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility that there may be certain things that are missing. So I guess that's a general plan for any of the ones that were developed really by anybody. And how are we checking on them? I mean, we do. I mean, how far off? It's like we do Phoebe, and that gives recommendations from there. What do you think are? Where do you think are going to be the data sources that may give us issues?
I mean, I guess I'd extend that and say, I mean, maybe there's an opportunity. I don't. It's probably not going to be during the weekend, but where we should probably be, checking off some of the best practice. And Joel, yours are probably have already been fleshed out with, database level characterization with cohort diagnostics. But I know that that certainly should be done in some of these surgical ones. And some of a lot of the outcomes are already in the phenotype library, but I can't kind of fully say that I know what the different operating characteristics of each of them are, and maybe within a smaller set of databases, that's something that we tie off after the weekend, just to make sure that. I mean, it's hard because it'll be hard to get the full set of participants that we might get during the weekend, but and that's actually the part that's of interest, right? To make sure there's not 1 or 2 outliers that aren't performant in terms of how it executes in their data, but at least it would give us give us a chance to evaluate them in a way that we recognize as best practice.
Yeah, I mean,
so Evan, like yours. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so just this week, I was looking at echocardiogram in echocardiography in the Japanese data set, and I was seeing very low numbers. And I talked with some folks who are from Japan who work closely with the JMDC data set, or work with Japanese data, and they mentioned the echocardiography code that most prevalent in Japan, and it didn't seem to be in our vocabulary. I have a question out to Claire to check on that, but I couldn't find it in there at all. So one of the things that may be coming out from this is that there may be in some of the ex-US data sets, there may be codes that aren't even in the vocabulary that we should, be aware and pass on to vocabulary group.
So I'll make a comment on this, and I know we have the expert here. Anna is on the call. The only module that I know that executes at the study level is the cohort diagnostics orphan concepts. So the cohort diagnostic orphan concept is if executed on a new data source, if it presents a new orphan, that's one approach of finding codes that we may have missed. But it's not the same as PB 2.0. It's one of the earliest implementations of this idea of orphan concepts. Otherwise, the network study, like Azza said, is the concept prevalence study is the other way of knowing about it. But if the data source that we are using in the study was not part of the concept prevalence study, then we may have gaps. Any other thoughts, Anna?
I mean, GMDC was a part of concept prevalence. It's a question if it's not in the vocabularies, then we will not see it because we did not analyze 2 billion codes. So that would be this gap for all of the data sources. So that seems like a vocabulary problem. If you find something, you really should submit a GitHub issue so that we can add codes, blah blah blah. But as a short-term solution, there's got to be different short-term solution for this for the symposium.
And for Evan's study in particular, it's like if how often gonna run mostly like you have the U.S. data sources. We haven't even looked at that, like because you used replicated codes, and those are procedures which are more likely to be problematic. So I do wonder if maybe we need to take one phenotype for each of the 4 main analyses that you Gowtham went through, and maybe break out to groups, and just use cohort diagnostics and Phi evaluator to review. And that we can't, on Saturday, we're not going to have enough time to do that, but maybe we can either do one as a group and then break into groups to kind of create the work stream to continue after. You can't, I mean, if the edit is so big, then you will need to rerun. If you're leading something, you will have to work with the data partners to rerun. In case you found a big error, or if you just found some limitations, you can always, contextualize your results within those limitations, something like that. But I do think maybe the best use of our time is actually to provide some process to review those cohorts for how often. I don't know. I mean, Gowtham and my idea was to take the time not to only focus on review cohorts, but to use that as an opportunity to lead clinical description papers on certain things. But maybe we could do the same. Like if we take, either one of your outcomes, Evan, or one of your outcomes, Joel. Or who else do we have? Or Andrea's work. Andrea's cohorts has problems, so those we already know that they won't actually run for, but that's another topic. But maybe we can do 2 things. Maybe we can start a work stream led by the people who are running the studies, like Evan and Joel. If you guys want to continue evaluating the cohorts. And then focus on 1 or 2 ideas to do a clinical characterization of those two phenotypes.
Yeah. So
Can I ask a question just to follow up on that? So as of right now, there's no cohort diagnostics being executed on any of these, but I think if I'm understanding your proposal correctly, we would take 4 cohorts, 1 for each study, and execute cohort diagnostics as part of running How Often? Or
No, we can't execute. No, yeah, we can't execute as part. That will take forever.
Take
but
too
we
long,
could
yeah.
use J&J.
Okay.
But that would be useful for you but that won't be useful for Joel because you already did that for the most part. Unless, Joel, you have like maybe serious infection is not something that you digged into, Joel, because you did that last minute.
let me interject as and just
Sorry,
answer
yes, we
Adam's
do
question.
have a cohort diagnostic.
We do have cohort diagnostics output, and it's publicly available that you all have access to right now for all the cohorts that I showed and are a part of How Often. They have not been looked at by humans. That is, nobody has actually done and dug into it, but the cohort diagnostics output is available on data.odyssey.org/phenotype library because those code definitions are part of the phenotype library, and they have been executed on data sources that are part of the phenotype library diagnostics study.
So this has been executed on all the cohorts in the phenotype library?
All the cohort definitions that are in active status, yes. So if something has been soft deleted, has errors or something like that, those have been removed. But like the serious infection that we just talked about is here.
Did you turn off all characterization, or do you have any characterization results here?
Yeah, so I have, because characterization size is very high, that's the only one that has been limited, which is actually one of the most important one, but it does have, let's see, I'm just going to bring one data set and I'm going to bring raw. It does have 3 domains, which is the cohort, Evan, that's cohort as features, and demographics. Those are the only information that's available. I have not done, like condition occurrence, procedure occurrence, because the file size becomes too big for the Odyssey infrastructure.
Yeah, fair enough.
And we try to investigate just table 1. Oh no, we try to investigate demographics, which you have, but you don't have table 1 because you can't do table 1. Table 1 is featured extraction.
Well, it does do table 1 with, I think, limited just demographics, which is useful. But the other diagnostics are available and we can still use those.
But for something like Evan, probably index event breakdown is something you'll spend time on just to see how much you captured from the idea you think you should capture by using the codes.
Yeah.
So you still have cohort counts. At the minimum, you should look at all the cohorts that are part of How Often and see if they at least have 1 person, right? Because that's an indicator of basic quality.
So we know that everybody has, other than Andrea's, everybody has counts. Okay, so let's table that. Maybe I think we need to do some evaluation for How Often as part of our time, because we do have cohort diagnostics. And then Gowtham, do you want to cover Anna's question about the second part of what you were?
Yeah.
The only thing I'll throw in there is, if we could run in those select cohorts more in terms of characterization, that might be helpful. I'm just kind of thinking ahead to the fact that that with the surgical cohorts, for example, procedure occurrence will probably be a big part, big thing that we want to look at. But completely understand why there'd be limitations in terms of running it across the whole library. I didn't realize this was even there. This is great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so the phenotype library process is independent of How Often, and that's why this was executed. But if you want an execution as part of How Often, we can definitely do that, and because we have a protocol that's been reviewed and so on, we can follow that. But it's just something that we have to do, and that because it's a subset, we can turn on full characterization.
Joel and Evan, and maybe Anna, if you're gonna jump in after the deadline, could you just for the let's think of, could you nominate 2 cohorts that you would think we could do full evaluation with maybe potentially other data sources on Saturday? That could also be an interesting clinical idea for a characterization paper. Could you like nominate 2 cohorts and then we can think of?
That's a good idea. Let me add to what Asa said. So I think we are thinking of dividing it into 2 parts. One is like create like a template for how a work like this could be done in a reproducible way based on experiences of the past. Like Joel has published a paper or 2 on using the framework of let's do the full phenotype development evaluation. Let's take a clinical angle to some extent and then kind of write a story about it. So that's the angle. Andrea Noel is on the call. She's been thinking about anaphylaxis, for example, as the clinical angle to write about it. So one of the topics that's on the agenda that Joel agreed on is like to spend briefly about give his perspective on how to use the framework as for an applied work. So we could start with that, but then if you can sponsor based on looking at this list, clinical ideas that would be meaningful for group work, we can focus some energy on that.
Because what you need to do is take those 4 particular phenotypes and run for characterization for.
Yeah, and p-evaluator and so on.
So we will provide the setup, and we won't be able to do it on all the data sources that had how often, because there's no time, to ask people to run, and we can't expect data partners to be on cohort diagnostics or characterization. They're already trying to, set up to run how often. But that could be, we can also learn of like, how can we actually, like, we still don't know how to determine if a data source is appropriate for a certain phenotype in a network setting. Like you build a phenotype, you have some idea of measurements that you think it's fine, but now you put it in a network study. Do you just blindly run and take results? Like we still don't know how to do an evaluation for like a new data source, but maybe I'm mixing stuff. But maybe for now we just focus on evaluating 3 or 4 for how often, and maybe set the steps to continue that for the rest of the phenotypes, because we can't do all of them. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, take a clinical angle and describe the real world characterization of the people who meet the phenotype.
Yeah. What do you think, Evan, and anybody else? Do you guys think you can pick up from this list 2, maybe 3 phenotypes that we put our energy on and as preparatory for?
Yeah, I picked a couple of from the list. I picked those that seemed interesting and are respiratory care. So PE, in fact, fits very nicely. But I will think more in the upcoming days about the actual clinical problem that can motivate other people to work these phenotypes. Because there's like acute, for example, the one that I picked was acute respiratory failure, which I felt was interesting because it can have different reasons, but I gotta think about the actual clinical problem, which would help also in paper writing, of course. So yeah, of course I'll do that.
Anna, don't we have your actual the work from the syphilis challenge? Your phenotype didn't make it to Patrick's list, Gowtham, the end-stage renal disease. I don't think, because it's not a DME, I don't think we captured it, Gowtham.
End-stage renal disease, there is so much stuff written on it.
Okay, you don't want to dig that again. Okay.
It's
okay,
like
it's in the library, but I don't think, okay.
I don't think it's publishable. And in fact, the bottom line is that end-stage renal disease code is what you need. like it doesn't get any more complex than that. And there is a lot of research on that already. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the face-to-face agenda, Evan, I'll let you speak in a minute. Face-to-face agenda, we start with some form of a 15 to 20 minutes overview from Joel about the framework of how we can have a reproducible framework. Then we go through Anna and Evan about the clinical idea, and then we walk through that clinical idea as something that will help motivate the others who have volunteered in the list, break out into subgroups, and over the next few months execute their work.
And last year, Gowtham, we actually created a template to help what to look at in cohort diagnostics, and like we created some rubric for Jamie and also for your for Jamie's session, and then for your what was it, tutorial?
Yeah.
So maybe we use that like that rubric of like look at the index event breakdown and see this is what you should look at, and that indicates sensitivity, specificity errors and stuff like that. That's for cohort diagnostics.
Jamie's example of acute pancreatitis.
Yeah, but we created like a template that can help people who have never done it before, or can structure the work group session.
I think you're just talking about the one pager that says like sensitivity errors. Are there, characteristics that you see that you don't expect, and specificity errors, the opposite, exactly.
But it corresponds to the tabs in cohort diagnostics and shows like, look at that, like it goes basically how to use the tool a little bit. That can be just like a guidance to work for the work groups to progress of what to look at.
Yep.
Do you have that material? I think I may have that somewhere.
I have it.
It's buried somewhere in my digital broom closet.
Okay, Evan, did you have a comment? I'm sorry, I cut you off maybe.
No, you didn't at all. I mean, well, I guess I'll take the chance just to clarify one thing. So, Joel provide his the overview, and then are you thinking that we would go through as a big group a couple of cohorts, or that we would break out at that point and or just announce which ones that potentially Anna's working on, I'm working on, and then just break up the group into smaller groups and work that way?
I'm thinking of a big group session where we actually do assimilate the whole work. This was the motivating example. Here's the cohort that we started with. This is what we saw. This is the story that we're going to think of. This is how we're going to write it. This is the structure. You now learn from Joel the template. It's now applied it over here.
Sure.
But Gowtham, that's going to eat up all the time. We're not going to actually produce new work. I would suggest Joel to give a high level of the process, and with like some examples, like how we typically do this in cohort diagnostics. We evaluated data, kind of result data, and very high, and maybe the theory kind of behind it.
It's 4 hours, Asa.
Hear me out. So if we do the first 30 minutes, just introduction of what we're gonna do, and Joel give a high level of what the process look like, what are the tools that we're gonna use, and then we go into the 4 phenotypes, and then or 3, whatever, and then maybe Anna and Evan provide the clinical description of those, so identify the target, because Joel gonna explain that we always start with that input of what the thing we're trying to phenotype, and then Anna and Evan describe it clinically, like basically provide the case definitions and describe why. I mean, the why in the analytical use case is obvious, because we're talking about how often. So the purpose of those phenotypes is to be outcomes in a or targets in a incidence rate analyses, depending on what you pick. And then you take a break, and then you come back, and I really think we can't do it we don't want to do a lecture of how you do it, because that's going to turn into a lecture that we pre-cook and then present. And I think we shouldn't do this again. We did it last year in a whole tutorial. Jamie did it for pancreatitis. I think this time, to be useful, I think we break into 4 groups or 3 groups, depending on how much we have in the 4 cohort. And if we have cohort diagnostic and maybe fee evaluator results, and the groups use the templates with one of us. So you take a group, I take a group, Joel take a group, and then you do this with your own group. Go through the process.
I like it. I like it. I think so. We have some names coming up. I know Anna has some names coming up, names of people who want to lead this. So let's do this. Let's figure out the number of names that we have, and if for those who and then people who do not want to lead one, partner with the persons with the name. They are thinking about the clinical idea that they want to work on, but on the day they're working on the clinical idea that Anna and Evan are leading. So they're just using the day to just learn how to do it for their cohort by doing a little bit on Anna's and Evan's cohorts.
Yeah, and if they want to parallelly work, if they're familiar enough, I'm assuming most people actually never done it. And now I know that the very few people went from A to Z looking at every diagnostic, try to make sense. It's a lot. And sometimes you get nothing after looking at 2 hours. So if somebody already knows how to look at diagnostics and cohort diagnostics and understand how to contextualize this with fee evaluator results, fine, they can do it. They can create their own group and work. But I think we won't be having data available for people to work on other than forming cohorts that you can produce diagnostics for, characterization for. And then if somebody wants to pick something out of the list that they're interested in and already have the diagnostics, the simple diagnostics, they can follow. Not this one, Gowtham. This is phenotype development and evaluation. That's the full process. We're talking about just evaluation.
Okay. Yes, you're right. Full evaluation would just be.
I mean, if you open our symposium last year, we created a template for myocardial infarction, Gowtham, that we went through in your tutorial. But also, Jamie has created one completed for pancreatitis.
Okay, so I'm focusing on phenotype evaluation only, which is in this framework, this one component. Okay, we are on time. Any last comments before we break out?
Anna, do you have phenotypes you want incidence for part of how often? Is that what you meant by I missed the deadline?
No, Gowtham sent out the spreadsheet saying, well, here's the spreadsheet, and you pick things and blah, blah, blah. So I sent it back, but it was way too late.
No, it's fine. It's fine. That October 3rd deadline.
Is fine. I thought the deadline by Patrick, because that was hard, because Krishna is already running. Wait, Jamie, I have a question.
That I know, yeah.
I think we're out of time. I just wanted to point out that Thomas had asked a question about comparative cohort diagnostics and how it might work in conjunction with cohort diagnostics to support estimation studies. So again, we don't have time to get into that now, but the answer is yes, cohort diagnostics are important for comparative cohort diagnostics, and having your indications and outcomes correctly phenotyped will definitely support a better, more valid comparative estimation study.
Yeah,
but again,
my question was a little bit different, and I mean, if you've got a minute, I can frame it. Otherwise, I can try to put it into sort of a forum post. Do you have a minute?
Go ahead.
So really, it's a little bit different. So as I'm building cohorts, often for quality measures, I've got my inclusion. I've got lots of different inclusion criteria that go in there. But what I'm finding is what I'd like to be able to do is have the exact inclusion criteria and then a looser inclusion criteria, and be able to capture when the cohort is generated, not only who's in the cohort, but for each inclusion criteria, what concept code triggered that inclusion criteria, at what date time, and for what value, and possibly some additional parameters. Because that way I can look at effectively a time to event. Many of my cohorts are really using date time, where I've got a drug, and then do I have the right lab test within 30 minutes, or things along those lines. And what I'm finding is that I don't see much there, but I want to be able to say, okay, well, how do I tell which ones maybe it's in 35 minutes instead of 30 minutes, or things along those lines. So I was thinking about casting a wider net. And if I build those two cohorts, then I'd love to be able to have an output that gives me eventually who's in all of it, and then sort of what triggers entry for each inclusion criteria. And so my question is, does that capability already exist within cohort diagnostics, or is anyone working on something like this? If not, I'm happy to put in an issue request, but then which I presume would be sort of a request at probably the Atlas or the CIRCE B level.
My quick answer would be that the tools in its native form do not support that level of information, but I think it is possible to do it using some modifications of, by intelligently using the tools together. And that's my initial thought, but I think this will require a little bit more brainstorming and whiteboarding to figure it out.
Sure. Okay, I'll put it in as an issue, and then we can.
Like using the tools in their native form, you could set as your index event criteria the inclusion or exclusion criteria that you're talking about, and then say that they have prior whatever your original cohort index event criteria is, and then run cohort diagnostics against that. And then with the index event breakdown function in cohort diagnostics, it would tell you which code triggered the it's just like it's doing a little just reversing around the temporal order of what is the index event criteria. But I see what you mean in terms of like actually diagnosing the inclusion exclusion criteria. The tool doesn't do that on its own currently. Okay. You'd have to finagle with the existing tools to get it done. Yeah,
I'm happy to write up the request. The question is, where do you recommend? Should I do it in the forums, or in an issue for cohort diagnostics, or Atlas?
If you frame it as a study question, where you basically say, I want to know what is the inclusion criteria impact something, like that's your question. Like you specify a characterization question and say, oh, how do I do this? And you just take a real case, like maybe diabetes rule. So don't think about it as a software, think about it as a research question that you're trying to answer. And if you pose it in the forum, then we can think about from a use case perspective. Like we're solving this use case.
I don't think you mean research question. You mean if you explain a use case, like go through a use case, that would make the what exactly you need more clear. But what you just explained in terms of the process of like comparing cohorts, and you're using the exclusion criteria as the factor that you're changing or using, like trying to adjust and then see the effect. Like we do this in practice all the time in phenotype development. Like when we develop cohorts, when we build logic, we're technically trying to make these decisions, and usually just try one decision and then run cohort diagnostics and understand that, and then say, oh, maybe I should be less restrictive. Let me change the time frame, and we build the cohort again, and we compare the two cohorts. The idea of trying to get what drives the codes in the exclusion or inclusion criteria, we don't use it so much because you could get some proxies of that using the when you build your concepts, you can look at the record count, and that's going to tell you roughly which going to be your driver in that inclusion exclusion, because in the whole database, not in the people who's going to meet the algorithm, but that gives you an idea of which of these codes going to be the driver. So you can start building. So that's how we do it, like kind of rough estimate of where things are going. But that process you explained is Like that's exactly what we do. We build phenotypes, we
Right.
run 2 different versions, and we try to use the tool with what it provides to kind of understand what is the effect. We didn't run so many times with trying to know what is the effect and try to understand the index, like that in the exclusion criteria. When that happens, as Jamie said, what we do is we go around it and flip the index date to be the inclusion, so we can see more information about that index date, because the tool is very designed around giving you information on that index, whatever you specify it. So it's going to give you detailed information about the index in terms of codes, in terms of hospital setting, in terms of characterization. Everything is oriented around it. So if you want more about that particular date, you just flip the design. But I see how you could have a tool that gives you those details across different time points in the logic, and that would be the need that you're asking for.
Yeah, there's ways we can do that. So if you would make it a use case forum post, I think it'll be helpful for the engagement. We can even make this a topic for a future conversation as part of this work group.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much.
There's a software called Cohort Algebra can do some creative stuff for you.
That one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm sorry we are 8 minutes over. Hope this conversation was useful.
See y'all.
Folks.
Bye.
See you soon.